Hi, I just got out the shower. I'm putting this in as a preamble because, like, this is a long video. I know it's going to be a long video because, like, more or less, I grew up in a religious household, and, like, so by growing up in a religious household, like, not being allowed to play Pokemon plays into a lot of other things, right? And this is also not just about religion, right? It's about systems and structures and how these things interplay with one another. I know at one point in time in the video, I'm like, bro, why does a pastor need a Rolls Royce, right? And that sounds dumb on paper, right? But then you think about it like, yes, that kind of makes sense because, like, a pastor or a church leader, as somebody, as a member of the community who serves others, right? But then also, like, that gives somebody who is down on the bottom, like, as far as what I thumbs down, but they give somebody who's like lower on the totem pole of like life something to look up to. Like, oh my God, my pastor has a Rolls Royce. Maybe one day I can be Rolls Roycing like him too. So there is like a reason to that, even if it seems superficial or dumb or stupid. But like at the same time, that's not me outright defending it. And there's other little things like that. That's why this video is like long because it's systems that play into other things that all tie into the fact that I was not allowed to play Pokemon as a child. Okay? Thank you so much. Have a nice one. Enjoy the video. I think I'm gonna edit this and start it out with like the part that is the history of Pokemon. So let's get into this. So just for clarification's sake, and before we get started, I'm gonna say a lot of stuff. But in my household, up until at least the release of Pokemon Red Mystery Dungeon, which was released in '06, I was not allowed to watch Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! Harry Potter, anything with witchcraft, wizardry, etc. But as I look into it and as I try and like clarify and with the history of Pokemon as well as like Yu-Gi-Oh! Etc., I get confused because I had certain like promotional tie-in toys, like the Yu-Gi-Oh! The movie promotional tie-ins for Burger King. I remember having those, but I wasn't allowed to watch the show. I could passively interact with like these pieces of media, but in the same way like Mormon kids weren't allowed to drink soda. So, and I say that because Pokemon Mania was absolutely insane in the 2000s. So, Pokemon is based off of Satoshi Tajiri's love of bug collecting, starting as a small passion project when he was working at Game Freak magazine, in which the magazine would publish tips and tricks on how to beat games. So then he and another illustrator at the magazine were not satisfied with the games that were coming out at that moment in time, so they were like, hey, let's make our own game. The first game that Game Freak would publish is called Quinty or Mendel Place, depending on where you're researching, etc. And it was through or after the success of Mendel Place which inspired Tajiri to have the confidence to pursue his greater passion project of Pokemon. So Pokemon, or at least the game that would become Pocket Monsters, took 6 years to develop and almost bankrupted Game Freak. They even lost 5 employees during the time of development, and it caused Tajiri to actually work on the game for free. Though they persevered, and in 1996, Pokemon Red and Pokemon Green hit store shelves in Japan. And Pokemon was originally developed and designed to be 2 separate games to encourage trading as well as collecting. Again, Tajiri grew up collecting bugs. His mindset was part of the core design of Pokemon, being designed around the Game Boy's link cable and system, which the complexities of the development of them is why it took 6 years to create the game. And I don't think a lot of people realize how complex the systems of Pokemon as well as the creatures themselves are, having their own DNA and being completely backwards compatible from the first title all the way up to the most like recent. Not only do these Pokemon have DNA and they have temperaments and traits, but there's now this whole subculture and sub-market of resurrecting and preserving Pokemon, so you can take your Pokemon from your like childhood copy of Leaf Green and bring it all the way into Scarlet and Violet. But even though there are tons of reproduction Pokemon cartridges on the market and you can emulate the games, you cannot use unlicensed Pokemon. I don't know how they managed to like really put that full stop in there. But for example, so I know this is going to be a cute little antidote. I used to, when I had Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, I say Sword and Shield in a later clip, but like I used to just catch shiny Sylveons. They are my favorite Pokemon, but I figured out what time and place I needed to go there, and I would just catch them for like 3 or 4 hours. I had so many of them, and I just give them away in random trades. But like I just ended up getting a bunch of hacked Pokemon afterwards. I don't know, I named them too. I named them all really cute things. I think that complexity and that like relationship to a creature, I find that really endearing. I don't know, I wanted some kid's fucking busted Turtwig that he named like Rock or something. But no, you just get a bunch of like hacked Pokemon that say PokemonCC.com. And I didn't delete these Pokemon like you're supposed to. I just kept them in my Pokemon bank and just offloaded them from the game. And then Pokemon or Nintendo just deleted my Pokemon bank account. Okay, so no, Nintendo does not delete your damn Pokemon bank or Pokemon home account because you have bootleg Pokemon in there. That's fake news. That's Alex Jones, right? What happened was I forgot the login information and used the wrong email address. That being said, if you want to take a look at my Pokemon bank, this isn't my full bank. I think my full bank is like on the Switch cloud. So like I know my Pokemon are good. Like once I get a Nintendo console, like I can rescue them, right? They're kind of stuck in like Nintendo liminal jail. But yeah, these are the ones on like the Pokemon Home on the phone version. And it's cute, like I'm saying, like they're full virtual pets. So you can see their stats, their temperaments, where they came from, when they were born or captured, etc., etc. So like that's what I like about it because like I am attached to all of these. Like hell, if I lose any of these again, I'm freaking out mentally because I hope those Sylveon are safe. When I tell you, bro, I was like running a little damn Sylveon farm just to give them away for free. I'm not even kidding you. But yeah, aren't Pokemon so cute? But here's the difference between like a standard Pokemon and a bootleg Pokemon. And with bootleg Pokemon, they usually give you like the super fancy turbo shiny Pokemon. Like I think I got gifted a hacked shiny Eevee. And I was pissed off because I'd never seen a gray Eevee before. And I was like, oh my god, this is the coolest thing. And it turns out it was hacked. Meanwhile, I'm giving away like real shiny Sylveon. I don't know. I feel like it's not that hard to get a shiny Sylveon. That's why I was farming them, bro. Like you just gotta be there. Hopefully I made some damn 12-year-olds day doing that shit. I still want to do it. Um, I don't know. Which sucks. So yeah, kids, don't use or look for aftermarket or illegal Pokemon. They will crack down on your ass. So this is why not just nostalgia, but first edition or like actual authentic copies of these Pokemon titles fetch such high prices on the secondary market, especially if somebody plays the Pokemon games competitively, not only for the sake of collecting, but just, you know, to be able to get a competitive edge. Like, my favorite Pokemon, like Rapidash, doesn't really exist, or one of my favorites doesn't really exist in contemporary Pokemon. Yes, there's a Galarian Rapidash, but that's a variation that is regional. So it's much like monsters, bugs, or even true animals, which I think is really endearing. Though shortly after, the game's release in '96, we got the Pokemon trading card game, and Pokemania went crazy. The card game was originally designed and developed by Creatures Inc. in Japan after they imported a bunch of Magic the Gathering cards to take influence from, and they licensed Magic the Gathering / Wizards of the Coast to facilitate localization, though they ended up cutting ties with them shortly thereafter because they ended up changing a lot of the gameplay rules and minutia about the Pokemon game. Which is funny because don't nobody play that, but I'm glad that they wanted to preserve the integrity of the vision. And though I wasn't allowed to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon, I was allowed to play Duel Masters, though I think it flew under my parents' radar, because all it was rebranded Magic the Gathering, which I think is really interesting, but I also think that's kind of strategic. But you know, the reflective gaze of Duel Masters versus Magic the Gathering is its own thing. But yeah, it's literally just rebranded Magic the Gathering. That being said, what I am trying to say is that, like, I didn't really play card games as a kid because ain't nobody playing no fucking Duel Masters. Nobody heard of that bootleg-ass game or that bootleg-ass franchise, but I did really love that game and its metallic case that I remember picking out very distinctly from Walmart and enjoying the hell out of those free cards that I got. And I remember there was a McDonald's Duel Masters promotion that I tried to get my hands on, but ain't nobody playing no damn Duel Masters. And I think that is a core theme of this video. All these things that we're talking about are facilitated by a certain cultural popularity. For example, if you don't know, Beanie Babies was kind of only really popular because like a certain group of very rich moms across the US who were bored as fuck started collecting them. and they gained value, and therefore everybody caught wind of that. And I don't know, there's a good documentary about the history of Beanie Babies, but the history of Beanie Babies, and if history has taught us nothing, where everything looks like new Beanie Babies to me, including Funko Pops. I hate Funko Pops and their beady eyes, but let's just, let's get back on track. So, Pokemon, the card game is out. It is 1996. It has not hit the States yet. In fact, they just greenlit an anime adaptation of the series, and they are in the process of localizing the games to the United States. And keep in mind, it is still 1996, so they released Pocket Monsters Blue, or Pokemon Blue, which is like the finalized, perfected version of Red and Green, which then ties into the now cultural normalization that Game Freak has done of like an A, B, and then a C finalized like premium version of those games. And while they were localizing as well as developing the anime would hit the States a little bit before the games themselves were localized for the United States in 1998, and we got just Red and Blue initially, getting Pokemon Yellow a year later in the States. Though we here in the States never got Pokemon Green that initial go-round, and I forgot to mention that Pokemon Yellow is like a starting with Pikachu, kind of more to the anime storyline of the initial Pokemon games. So this is what's really fascinating. So Duel Masters was created because Wizards of the Coast lost the Pokemon license because they kept trying to turn Pokemon in the States into Diet Magic the Gathering, and the Pokemon team was like, no, stop changing our cards. We'll just handle it in the States. We're gonna unlicense with you guys. So then they invent Duel Masters, which was designed to compete with both Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Duel Masters was like the anime version of the card game they played. Like they played something different, but like Yu-Gi-Oh! They play a different game called Duel Monsters. So like they were trying to capitalize in the same way, but like they're technically playing Magic the Gathering in the Duel Masters TV show and anime. But yeah, I played fucking Duel Masters and nobody really played it, and I didn't really get back into Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Duel Masters until 5D Yu-Gi-Oh! Came out, which was like the white cards. But I'm kind of salty because like looking back on it and thinking about it, if I was allowed to still play with like Yu-Gi-Oh! And all of that, I definitely would have had a dual disc as a kid. I fucking loved Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! is my shit. I loved it so much as a kid. I don't know. Like I said, I think I said it later on in the video, dude, I just like one day in like late high school or like early like 1920, I was like, why do I still have all these toys? I don't need these. And just donated them. So who knows if I would still have that dual disc today. Dual disc are so badass. Also, sidebar, I grew up kind of poor. We didn't get like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon were there. I didn't get them. I just mostly got Hot Wheels. I got Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards one time years after, I don't know, I wasn't getting a ton of toys and stuff like that. And I hesitate to think in my like head if whether or not, like, even if I was allowed to play Pokemon, I'd have like the stash of Pokemon cards or like amount of Pokemon memorabilia that a lot of the kids have, or like when people look at their old stuff. I don't know. I remember one time my cousin wanted to give me their copy of Pokemon Monopoly, and my mom, I think this was slightly before the embargo, was like, no, you can't take that. That's too big of a gift. And I'm still salty about that to this day because that game had like clear houses, but kid logic. I didn't really give a shit about Pokemon. I just wanted Monopoly with the clear houses because I was like around the time I started playing Monopoly, I think. I don't know. I think it was probably like 02 or 03 maybe. It definitely wasn't the year it came out in 99 though. I guess in the timeline, we're probably in the year like 03, 04. Pokemon's still massive. The movies are out. They came out with Gold, Silver, and Crystal, which I was reintroduced to Pokemon personally in the Pearl and Diamond generation, which I'll talk about later. But yeah, I don't know. My relationship to Pokemon's really interesting, but I think that's also because I grew up in the Bible Belt. Like, I didn't know any other kids that were like super into Pokemon. I don't know, the only kids that I knew growing up who like played with and really rocked with Pokemon were like the quintuplets down the street from us. They had Yellow and Crystal for their Game Boy. But let's put it this way. I'm almost, as an adult, fostering a new relationship with these media properties. Like, I would say my relationship to Yu-Gi-Oh! Really starts with the Yu-Gi-Oh game that came out in like 2019, the Legends of the Duelist, right? Like that's where my relationship with playing Yu-Gi-Oh started. I don't know. It's also because pawn shop culture and growing up, and I sell stuff when I'm not using it. It's a bad habit. I'm trying to get out of it now. But like, I don't have a Pokemon cartridge tucked into a drawer with Pokemon data just saved on it decaying. I sold my Switch after telling those damn animals that I'd be their Animal Crossing advisor. Them poor animals, bro. I went out of my way to find Judy, and I sold her ass to GameStop. That damn, I disrespected that cute little animal. I don't know, I'm just thinking back on the shows and the media that I loved as a kid, and like Power Rangers, for example. I touch on this later, but like nobody really had Power Rangers toys, right? Like Power Rangers didn't have like this big ass like cultural impact in the way Pokemon does, but I think you can throw Pokemon on damn near anything and it just, still works. Like I really miss the taste of those damn Pokemon Pop-Tarts and the way the Pokemon cereal tasted and the way the Spider-Man Pop-Tarts tasted. And it's not nostalgia, but they used to just, fuck around and slap them cartoons on anything. And the breakfast cereals were better for it. My friends and I have always dueled without drugs. I know that marijuana will ruin my concentration and throw me off my game. Besides, I have an even better vice than that. If I were to have spent all my money on drugs, how would I be able to banish my opponents to the Shadow Realm? With gambling, I know that I've already lost. It's a defeat I accept from the moment I purchase a card. But unlike marijuana, it does not throw me off my game. And unlike drugs, I know card games, and gambling is something I can. I was hooked from a young age. Honor and income. That's my drug. No drug allows me to vanquish those who oppose me to the Shadow Realm. Remember, say no to drugs. So what is it? It's 8 a.m. Okay, so I keep trying to make a video on Pokemon because Pokemon's celebrating its 30th anniversary, right? And I was one of those kids who grew up during the early 2000s satanic panic, quote unquote, where, people were afraid of Pokemon and a lot of media properties. And I keep trying to make this video and talk about that because I think that's a unique experience, especially on a platform like YouTube, where most of the creators are white, middle class, and grew up in a cultural zeitgeist that is a heavy part of the monoculture, right? Now, because I grew up black, lower middle class, and in the Bible Belt, a lot of my experience with media and pop culture is through a certain learned nostalgia, and that isn't to say that I didn't have my own personal experiences with Pokemon growing up. In fact, I was actually allowed to play Pokemon as a kid. I love it. I still have my childhood Blastoise. It was like just randomly during that developmental phase of my childhood when my mom came home one day and was like, actually, you're not allowed to play Pokemon, Pokedemons, but it wasn't just Pokemon, it was Harry Potter, Yu-Gi-Oh, and a whole litany of stuff, right? But that doesn't mean that that didn't stop me from playing that stuff, getting my hands on it, etc. Is that this and this fundamental lived experience has shaped every aspect of my life, right? It still shapes and affects my life to this day. Me not being allowed to play Pokemon is actually a multifaceted and nuanced issue that is at the crux of my childhood, but is also extremely endemic or informed about pop culture and says a lot about the cultural zeitgeist as a whole. Pokemon is literally the biggest media property globally, and I don't hate it, but it's very easy to make a video like this and be like, oh, Pokemon gambling, capitalism bad, commodity fetishization bad. It's also easy to say, Pokemon, too young for me. I'm an adult now, right? I am 28, but I like Pokemon, but passively. I too think that's partially because, like, during that developmental phase of, I want to say, like, maybe 5 to 9, I wasn't allowed to really have Pokemon like that. I like Pokemon in the way a monkey likes a wired mother, and or the way a child who could never properly latch to a breast likes the taste of a bottle. I understand that I, as a content creator, have to show up and create something interesting. The original take or the original version of that, which you're kind of watching the Fallout Nexus and this acquiesce into your reality or listening to this take, all of that, is me, you know, opening Pokemon cards and dyeing my hair and talking about Pokemon, right? But Pokemon and not being allowed to play it, like I said, informed a lot of my childhood because it wasn't not being allowed to play Pokemon, it was not being allowed to do and enjoy a lot of things that are part of the cultural zeitgeist and the monoculture, etc. Whether that be being able to, you know, actually do it as a child who doesn't have free will, or, you know, not really having the money or means to enjoy a lot of that, right? But I also understand that I grew up black and lower middle class, if not middle class, true middle class. You know, we did qualify for government assistance as a kid, and I also understand that no adult in my life has a large relationship to media or pop culture, which I think is very interesting compared to, you know, a lot of white people who I meet. It's not to say that all white people or all black people or all minority groups, but that is to say that, like, I don't have friends whose parents are explicitly nerdy. Explicitly nerdy in the fact that, like, I feel like I'm the first person in my generation bloodline to be into media, right? Because I understand that that is in and of itself a certain luxury. Respect, I'm also 28. I grew up poor, and my entire relationship to media is somewhat more passive, meaning that I'm hesitant to make this video knowing that Pokemon cards are one of the biggest forms of content creation right now, not only because they're expensive, A, but B, commodity fetishization, and C, because there's probably some kid somewhere who's like 7 to, 12 years old who can't afford packs of Pokemon cards, be it because of people explicitly scalping them or just because their family doesn't have the additional means to do so, right? It's no different than when I was, maybe 9 to 12 to 13 on YouTube watching console unboxing videos and things like that. And ironically, yes, I do and have had a relationship with Pokemon throughout the years, So I stole a copy of Pokemon Fire Red from my cousin, put Sharpie on the red case, took the label off, and then my mom caught me, right? Pokemon was literally contraband in my house. But then shortly thereafter, I was then allowed and then gifted by my family a copy of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Fire Red. But Pokemon, I guess maybe it didn't feel the same, right? Because there was some explicit pleasure for me as a child in sneaking behind my parents' back at the age of like 8 with a stolen copy of Pokemon, sitting there and playing it. I remember the exact moment in which I got in trouble and confronted. I was in the middle of like the Zubat dungeons, right? I never really played. I think I got to keep the game. But also too, I remember in high school, I randomly came across another Game Boy Advance SP in Cobalt Blue, which was the colorway I had as a child, and a copy of Leaf Green. And the reason why I say I came across it is because I can't remember if it was explicitly given to me by somebody in my high school theater class or I bought it off of them. But me saying that I bought a Pokemon and a Game Boy from somebody in my theater class doesn't sound like something I would have done, but you're like, you had Pokemon as a kid. I had sold my Game Boy up at that point because all I played was my 360. I was much the same with my Nintendo DS. But the point of me trying to say that is that, like, to a certain extent, I had a home console, which was a certain luxury as a child, and I've never had the luxury really of having multiple consoles. Now, granted, I did have a PlayStation 4 and a Switch, both of which I purchased myself into my adulthood, but I've had to let go just because of, financial constraints, other things like that. But I will say that, like, it's things like that that inform my entire childhood, inform my entire worldview, and inform everything, because the only Mario game I ever really have been able to play is Super Mario Advance 2 Yoshi's Island, because I didn't grow up with a Nintendo console in the house. I grew up with an Xbox. And when I bought my Nintendo Switch, I never really bought a first party Nintendo game other than like Animal Crossing and Pokemon, because they were always $60, $70 and never went on sale, right? Gaming, especially at Nintendo, is a certain luxury now. It's a very luxurious experience at Nintendo, meaning that everything, why the fuck do first party Nintendo games not go down in value? That's kind of fucking weird. Every other, manufacturer game on the Switch loses its value, right? Which allows people, who don't have means to play these games. I remember growing up, a lot of my video games, I got secondhand and used, or even given or traded to me, right? Through friends, etc. I was not buying my games at full price as a child. I wasn't buying really any games at all because I was a literal fucking child. Say and circle back to the fact that, like, this Pokemania and this speculation of Pokemon and the culture of Pokemon and a Pokemon resurgence is, yes, made by the nostalgia of adults, right? Who love buying things, that mimic and give them the childhood that they didn't have in their adulthood. I've done that too, right? But the speculation of that market, the hype of that market, is driven by adults. I hate scalpers, I don't hate resellers, because I understand it is a natural part of the cultural zeitgeist. I cannot blame these people for working within the system to try to get away or get out of the system, right? I cannot get mad at other YouTubers and content creators for doing Pokemon unboxing videos, Pokemon, card videos, because I literally sat for an hour the other day and questioned whether or not my dollar and my ethics would let me take a sponsorship from a gambling company, because I need money right now. I can't be upset at that, but I also understand that that's a certain manufacturing of consent culturally, right? I would normally have a spine, but I need money. Within that manufactured consent, you also have this phenomena culturally, which I can only describe as gray gardening. And I say that to bring up the documentary Grey Gardens. I don't know the year off rip, but I can sort of explain to you why I bring up gray gardening. So when you look at, history, all of that, we have to understand that women were not given bank accounts until 1978 or 71. I can't remember what number off the top of my head. I didn't write down notes. But with that, they were softly frowned upon, or in less than legal terms, dissuade and kept away from having their own bank accounts. Having your own income is a certain level of agency, right? Now couple that into the fact that my mom was born in 1959, right? That my mom, right? My mom's technically a boomer, but I need you to frame that and understand that these are my parents, technically, that grew up in a world in which women were beholden to men no matter what, right? And that is it's an element of the cultural zeitgeist no matter how you swing it, because these men and women still exist among us in our society. I think my mom's like 60, right? Now, what the fuck is gray gardening, and what do I mean by that?
Paris is the place for you. Get on the stage in Paris at the Folie Bergère.
The point is that I came down here to take care of my mother. I was sick and tired of worrying about her night and day.
Well, I had a very good
away from her for
I had a
5 or
very
6
good
years,
man.
and I was sick
I had a
and
very
tired
good
of
man to
lying
take
awake
care of
at
me.
night,
He took care of me.
wondering what was happening to my mother.
Who's the man?
Well, I got ideas about 23.
Nobody.
Very hard to live
there
with.
for 25
it's very
years. I took care of this damn house for 25 years.
The Libra husband is not an easy man to please.
Push you under the goddamn bed.
The monotony of domesticity is not to his liking, but he is a passionate man and a respecter of tradition. All I have to do is find this Libra man. The Libra husband is reasonable. He is a born judge, and no other zodiacal type can order his life with so much wisdom.
The animated Japanese import created by Nintendo also holds the top 5 video game slots. So what exactly is a Pokemon? Cute, cuddly characters who become supercharged so they can fight their enemies. But some experts say the entire Pokemon phenomenon is the enemy.
In my opinion, parents should not let their kids watch Pokemon, play Pokemon, buy Pokemon cards, have anything whatsoever to do with Pokemon.
Look at what you did, look.
Very few people have this, Al. I want you to see this. Now look. This is my mother. This British woman, maybe Jewish, I don't know. Dean family, not sure.
I don't want that photo.
Scotch blood, the
Imagine
Ewing.
showing all those horrible
Ewing
things that I don't want to
The
show.
Ewing twins in here. But it's just a girl from a good French family. It's a very beautiful face.
I lived alone these 30 years. I didn't mind. Get very independent when I live alone. Get to be a real individual.
You can't have your cake and eat it.
Oh, yes, I did.
In life.
I did. I had my cake, loved it, masticated and chewed it, and had everything I wanted.
Too.
I had a very, very happy, satisfying life.
When so strongly about my mentos and everything because of mother, that I was never able to ever clean out these desk drawers and throw the stuff away. Would you believe that? You know, it's childhood stuff. What are they called? Memorabilia or something.
Now, gray gardening is a very interesting phenomenon because you can't explicitly say or unsay that somebody is or isn't gray gardening. So gray gardening exists in the fact that there are two women at this house, Grey Gardens, Big Edie and Little Edie, both of which are victims of a system and a matriarchal family dynamic or patriarchal family dynamic in which neither of them really had their own agency, right? But within that system, Big Edie has kind of created and caved in the world on herself, right? Created this disgusting mess
this revolting mess in which she's not messed with, nobody talks to her, nobody comes there, etc., etc. It's created a world of madness, but it also too allows her to have the freedom as a woman to be left the fuck alone, do what she wants, do what she needs, and she also has an income consistently, right? And to a certain extent, little Edie is taken care of by Big Edie, but with that, you know, you can definitely feel and understand little Edie has a lot of frustration there, right? And I say all this in the fact, in watching the documentary, you can kind of watch both of them playing into a certain character dynamic, not only for the camera, but for each other, right? You know, hamming it up, egging each other on, things like that. And it's one of the few times you can really watch the real life game of what I can only describe as like kayfabe take place, in which that same game of kayfabe and people weaponizing things like, oh, this is satanic, you know, via this means, etc., or, you know, we're going to weaponize this item, right? And not looking at the multi-layered and complex issues of things, whether that be politics or something in your individual life, in which they are essentially weaponizing your knowledge or lack of knowledge on their knowledge on a subject, and a way to dissuade and play into a character role or exaggeration that allows them to get their favored outcome. It's essentially lying, acting, and bullshitting. That way you can get what you want out of the system as a whole. But with great gardening, I say that because the person builds a great garden to get a garden. A garden being their own personal sanctuary, but one that is filth, decay, and squalor. It's things like that, you know, and the fact that with no explicit or unexplicit terms, I've seen a certain level of gray gardening or actions and weaponization in my own personal life, not only through my parents, but also through other people, right?
One morning, he said, that's Pokemon. Son, I found out that Pokemon means pocket monster. Pokemon, plural, are incredible creatures that share the world with humans. Each has his own fighting abilities. Some grow and evolve into even more powerful creatures. The children are developing relationships with all these Pokemon creatures. Little, reclusive, power-filled monsters. But why should they carry these monsters in their pocket? They say the Pokemon whole effort is to train children how to become the #1 Pokemon master in the world. You follow it through the New Age teaching, you find out that masters are those who take control of spirits in the dark realm, and they tell those spirits what to do. The child at some point becomes capable of taking these powers and channeling them through their mind, through their arms, or through their power sources.
Gray gardening and things like that as a norm culturally as to why I really don't engage or give a shit with politics or talk about politics online, even though I am deeply political. Everything's fucking political. But the whole political thing is a giant farce of smoke and mirrors, in which if somebody really gave a shit, wanted to change something, had a problem, I understand that the systems of power exist, right? But there is a certain explicit or unexplicit terms and terminology that they can be using during debates. They can be being more, yes, this is what I believe, this is what I'm going to do, rather than, oh, well, this is a multifaceted, complex issue. And I understand that these things are a complex issue. The system itself is complex, right? But I also understand that if somebody or a body gave a shit about something, they would actually manifest that and weaponize the action to receive the outcome, right? It's something that informs everything in my life, in the fact that, like, I grew up in the state of Texas, you know, our minimum wage is $7 an hour, right? Which is, I think it might be 10 or something like that, but the national average is still $7 an hour, right? You know, here comes New York proposing to raise their minimum wage to $30 an hour by 2030. every state in America is a completely different experience because America is a republic, right? It's similar to the EU, but it's also with that and understanding that, my parents lost our house to foreclosure. I cannot in good faith or not in good faith explain to you why, but I know that I was affected in living under my parents' roof, or, which, to my understanding was my single mother paying for it. And to what I was told, the banks lied to her, right? I don't know if that lie is true or untrue, right? But knowing that and knowing my own personal experience with banks and weaponized language and the way that people will give you the runaround, and you're on the phone for like 30, 40 minutes asking, hey, why didn't my credit card payment go through? Only to find out that when you send the credit card payment to the company via your debit account, it doesn't explicitly take it then and there, even though you scheduled it, but it takes time to post and process, even though I do have everything on a certain level of automation in my life, right? So it can fuck up other things. Oh, that's your fault. But then the system is then explicitly designed therein because it's all one system, right? I understand it has to go through a processor, but it's all one system, but it's there to punish people who are poor or just getting by. Whether it be because of their own fault or whether or not the system is equitable and fair to begin with. If we acknowledge, people are still living at home, right? If we acknowledge that I say that in the fact that the minimum wage, the national minimum wage is not livable anywhere, but the local minimum wage is also not livable in a lot of places. And while I understand that technically the minimum wage was not ever meant to be quote unquote livable, it exists as a certain floor to keep people from falling under or, being left behind. What is to say when, the state's governments and these systems can easily, openly, and kind of raise taxes on my parents' home, right? Okay, so this next part gets a little bit more rambly, but it ties into everything. And that's what I mean, where I'm me not being allowed to play Pokemon ties into a lot of other aspects in my life, where I talk about Grey Gardening and then I talk about, Pokemon and how those systems were both weaponized, culturally, right? They were both weaponized to be scapegoats or placebos or false herrings to dissuade from actual political change, actual socioeconomic change, etc. For example, there's a lot of forgiven hypocrisy in not only politics but in religious teachings and stuff like that. And then when it comes to Pokemon and certain things like that, I know later on I might mention that I was allowed to play Duel Masters. Well, how was I allowed to play one but not the other? You know what I mean? How are, Moses parting the Red Sea, how is that okay, but Harry Potter's not? Both sound like magic to me. Right? But then the minimum wage doesn't change, right? And that's not to say anything about our house changed, but our taxes changed. But I can say in no certain or uncertain terms that my mom's income didn't change. Yet and still, me and my family are kept away from generational wealth because our house got foreclosed on, right? And that does affect me in many an explicit and unexplicit term. It's also to say that, America operates off a national economy, right, which is part of an international economy, and an MSRP reflects that no matter what, right? I used to flip and resell streetwear and Supreme. I don't really do it anymore, but all I was really doing was buying the product at MSRP and then selling it to other people who didn't have the time to get it at MSRP or didn't have the luck to get it at MSRP, but had the surplus disposable income to pay a little bit of a premium for it though. And this isn't bad, but it is kind of bad, and it's indicative of an issue and a symptom of an economy that's not healthy, because why are normal people buying retail goods and then reselling them and scalping them? And while I understand scalping and reselling has always been an issue and will always be an issue in a commodity economy and an economy that's based off of capitalism, because to have a surplus would be a loss, right? And to not sell stuff at a certain level of a premium, you put yourself in jeopardy, right? Then have to ask the question, why are normal people buying products to resell it, right? But then we also have to ask the greater question of the resale prices aren't that unfair as long as you have a certain value judgment on whether or not you believe the $300 Zapdos that you might pull is worth it. Whether or not that's before you look at the idea of gambling, but that's also to say based on your local economy, based on your wages, based on where you stay and your income level, whether that be the income level you are currently at or the one you grew up at, you then see that as fair, unfair, or equitable. So what I'm saying is that I kind of think it's irritating, weird, childish, and juvenile that, the Pokemon store is selling, 350 life-sized Eevee plushes, right? But I also understand that if I were to be and live in a market like New York or California where, yes, the minimum wage is $30 an hour. Hell, I looked at a damn career job opportunity. I think they were paying $30 to $50 an hour, right? Through like Warner Brothers. I just saw a job posting, right? I then think and look at, yeah, that's actually $50 an hour. That's 2 hours of my labor. Then to get a big ass life-size Pokemon plush, that ain't so bad, right? But I also understand that that in and of itself is a certain luxury or an economic tax bracket, right? But also, whose relationship is correct? The people who are at the middle and at the top, right? Or the people at the very bottom, right? But that is to say that I grew up at a certain level of being at the bottom, and I'll then argue that, a lot of my life, my luxuries, things like that, have been taken away from me, not because of my own choices or explicit shortcomings that are not explicitly the result of my direct actions. But you could say, oh, that's the result of your direct inaction because you didn't wake up in the morning, go to Target and buy the Pokemon cards that you could then resell and maybe make, $25 worth of a profit on top of getting the money back. Also to say, I'm glad that, the kids have a way to make a little bit of a commodity of an income here and there, to have that leverage to get what they want off of their parents. But I'm also glad that, this allows people to not sell drugs, not, have to scrounge and do less than, legal things to make the surplus income that they need because their local economy is failing them and not serving them. Because we've all seen Breaking Bad. Whether or not you've seen it, school teacher gets cancer and has to resort to, using his chemistry skills to sell meth. Here's the thing, and here's the gag. I'm so tired of thinking about the economy, complaining about the value of things, and then looking at the price of RAM and being like, wow, the price of RAM is really expensive. But I also know that like both the capital, the surplus, the AI, all that other shit might be trying to take computers away from the middle class. I'm not saying that that's an explicit end goal, but what I am saying is that these things are not being made affordable for certain classes and economic groups. And I look at the entire system from a top-down perspective, and I have to say, what is fair and equitable for everybody, right? But I also understand a computer is one of the most freeing things a person can own economically and allows them to change their life and potentially move into a different tax bracket if not for their local economy. Meaning that I kind of don't exist locally because every opportunity that I'm presented with on the internet is better than the ones that are explicitly there for me locally. But I also would like to move to a stronger local economy with more opportunities both in real life and online. All commodities are fetishized. Also, like, part of the issue with like RAM, computer parts, etc. is that like they want to push this like cloud computing bullshit, which is unfair, but it's also equally unfair that like the average person gets pushed out of the computer market when computers are a life-saving like necessity for everybody. You know what I mean? Like, it's not fair to say that somebody who's in the middle class or lower middle class shouldn't be allowed to have a computer. But last time I looked at RAM, that shit was like $50, $60, $70 to like upgrade your RAM. You want a little LED on it, was like $150, right? But the whole crypto economy and crypto mining economy is a digital gold rush, which I talk about later in this. But it's a fake ass gold rush where it's like you're mining bullshit, right? But not everybody's getting a fucking computer to mine cryptocurrency or to put on the fucking blockchain. No, these people wanted to use software build, but I understand that any and everything that a computer can do is something that, like most art and things that are skills that require you to have a computer. No, most things are art and skills that require you to have a computer, right? Computers, tech, all of that, it limits who can create and who can take part in the economy and who can do stuff that will level them up economically speaking. Like, it's not like the 1970s where motherfuckers, were doing gallery shows and they were like, oh my God, is that John Basquiat? Bro, let me pay John Basquiat, bro, like the $10,000 for this fucking painting. No, right? If nobody can see a fucking John Basquiat, how are you supposed to pop off like John Basquiat? Jean-Michel. But you know what I'm saying. At a local economy scale, meaning that, the price of scalping really isn't that negligible. It might be an additional $7 to $8 on top of the MSRP, but that $7 to $8 can look completely different. That $7 to $8 is either a quarter of your wages or an entire hour of your wages based on your local economy. But I also know from my understanding of economics, socioeconomics, etc., that suburbia America was explicitly designed as a tool of racial segregation as well as class segregation, right? And that's not just speculative. Like, Levittown was literally a tool of segregation, but that tool of segregation was then mimicked and copied all throughout the US, and certain communities didn't even rent to black people. I'm black, right? I'm also reading this book called The Anti-Aesthetic, which in one of the vignettes or essays, it then explicitly talks about and says how, like, the whole system of suburbia and not having people live in close proximity doesn't allow them to create community, doesn't allow them to engage with a wider world. How the fuck does this tie into Pokemon? Well, if you're an urban Pokemon trainer and you're trying to get them urban Pokemon demons, you probably make a little bit more of a Poke wage, right? At your Poke job. The Poke Center and the Poke nurses get paid a little bit better in the city just because, there's A, more traffic running in and out the door, and B, the entire standard of the economy at that Pokemon Center is a little bit higher. Therefore, you can buy your Master Balls instead of, having to worry about, scrounging, and you get like a regular ball or a great ball, and then you can catch that Zapdos in your life, right? But if you're a rural Pokemon trainer, your economy is a little bit weaker. The Pokemon that out there might even be a little bit weaker. You might not be around the Gyarados or all that shit, right? Your local Pokemon Center, yes, still runs fine. The nurses are wonderful there, but they make less because there's less traffic in and out that door. Right? Now, would you rather be a city trainer or would you rather be a rural trainer? That's up to you personally. But I also know that I've never been able to fully experience that urban lifestyle. Right? And I also know that you'd be a fucking idiot not to want to live in a state or in a place that allows you to have a better opportunity, which is both why people are immigrating from Mexico to the United States, which they're trying to keep away. But that's also why people immigrate from state to state. But that's also really fucked up and actually so fucking frustrating that the experience and lived experience of different states is so fucking different from state to state regarding income. But let's think about rights, etc., right? I live in the state of Texas. It's one of 13 states where weed is still illegal. Right? I know that sounds weird, but let's think about the entire, Colorado, California weed gold rush and all that happened. Did I say California, Colorado? Like, there was an entire weed gold rush, right? And we're kind of living in a certain digital and commodity gold rush where, like, yes, you can really make a lot of fucking money, but if you're stuck in a place where you don't have the means, where everything costs more, etc., it then becomes a lot harder, right? And it's it's really fucking frustrating. It's frustrating for not only myself, whether or not I want to buy or not buy Pokemon cards, but to watch play out in real time. Because it's not Pokemon cards, right? It's what Pokemon cards represent as a children's card game, which is, yes, right? But it's this carried over nostalgia where the monoculture of the internet is fucking juvenile as hell. And I'm not trying to be mean or disrespectful. Like, I like Pokemon cards, but I'm also reading fucking philosophy. I'm also reading books that are actually engaging with the world in my free time. I'm not just watching people rip open card packs. But I also know that I live and have a group of friends and a worldview where I know that, yes, my friends watch YouTube, right? And yes, they consume that content, whether it be lifestyle influencers, content creators that they can live vicariously through. But I also know that, you know, they watch sports, they watch TV too. So it's not to say that that isn't healthy or unhealthy, but that is to say that I think what is kind of irritating about the overarchingness of the monoculture is that it is a certain endless nostalgia, which can be frustrating because that endless nostalgia skews through both media and books and culture that allows children to take part. Therefore, all media, culture, and conversations have to then be brought into the public forum. Yes, I understand that, you know, there are certain things that we can and can't talk about in the public forum, right? But everything is watered down to a certain level of juvenility, stupidity, and just stuck at a certain level of just like, what's the word? Infantilized, for lack of a better term. I'm not saying that Pokemon is or isn't immature, but I am saying that, you know, you have grown adults whose entire lives revolve around these big media properties. I'm not saying that that's a bad or a good thing, but I know that partially because I didn't connect with Pokemon at that developmental age. You know, I look at and think about Power Rangers and how much I loved Power Rangers as a kid. I'm okay with and let go and wouldn't want to center my life or spend a bunch of money on Power Rangers, but that's also a value judgment too, right? You know, I love Sailor Moon. I probably watched less Sailor Moon as a kid than I did as like a teenager and an adult. So who's to say? Everybody has their Pokemon. And I'm no better than you for talking about my Pokemon or disrespecting your Pokemon, just because I, as somebody who couldn't fucking play Pokemon as a child or Yu-Gi-Oh as a child because I loved Yu-Gi-Oh and it was in fact contraband and then taken away from me, had to play fucking Duel Masters on the Game Boy Advance. And all Duel Masters is just a rebranded form of Magic the Gathering. Any and everything is based off capitalism. Pokemon was initially designed to make money. It was a bug-catching game, a hobby that the developer loved. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But, you know, this was a gaming magazine in which they taught tips and tricks, which was Game Freak, then eventually spawning and becoming a game. But Nintendo knew that they had to make it successful, so they launched the card game. But they too launched two versions of the game with slight regional differences to encourage players to catch, right? Catch them all, right? Play both versions, right? Catch the ones you can only get your Galarian Rapidos, get your regular Rapidash versus Galarian Rapidash. You know, two different versions. It's literally a virtual ecosystem, right? That was from the jump designed and merchandised to be a successful global product launch in and of itself. And that's what I find so interesting, because Pokemon's success was never an accident. But that's also the fact that, you know, the companies and corporations that were releasing, because I think it's 3 or 4 companies, I can't think of it. I took notes and I have a more astute one, but 3 or 4 companies that make up the Pokemon group now, or company, you know, got together and said, we believe in this product, we're going to give you the backing and we're going to give you the means to make this successful. And with or without, you know, bringing up brands, IPs, and things like that, that I've noticed that I've loved in the past, in which corporations haven't put them out with the amount of love and willingness to believe and be successful in those products because they're cynical about capitalism is this nasty aftertaste in my mouth that I always have when I think about Pokemon and the cultural zeitgeist. And yeah, Pokemon exists, right? But so did Beanie Babies, Beyblades, and other little commodities here and there. Apparently Mighty Beans are speculative now. I threw them bitches in the fucking trash as a kid. Or during my adolescence, I threw a lot of my toys away. I was like, one day I was like, I'm a teenager. Why do I have toys? And I like cleaned out because it just took up space. You know what I mean? I wanted to put my clothes in my drawers, you know, instead of having fucking a Tech Deck skate park in there. Which sucks because I did have the Tech Deck skate parks. I had a massive amount of Tech Decks as a kid. Or at least as an adult, adolescent, all of that. Like, as an adolescent, I had hella Tech Decks, and let's put it this way, I was there for when Tech Deck World was almost a thing, which was a Tech Deck MMO. You know what the Tech Deck MMO is? Being outside on a fucking skateboard. And with gaming, there's always a bitter aftertaste in my own mouth because in the recent past, you know, I not only had to sell off my consoles to help my family and pay for something that had nothing to do with me, you know, or my own personal failings, in which I haven't been able to replace those things outright, which is extremely frustrating to me because gaming was a hobby that I had throughout my childhood, but I also explicitly understand and know that in a certain way, gaming is a way for people who don't have the means to experience and do, to potentially experience and do. And that's equally as alarming and frustrating because, yeah, PC parts are getting more expensive, but are people going outside? Are people picking up hobbies instead? Or are people just sitting around twiddling their thumbs hoping that they can get a damn RAM part? I know this is getting a little bit rambly and long-winded, but I know that for me personally, living where I lived and where I grew up, I commuted 45-ish minutes into the city every time I needed to work. And the most recent job, I decided that's 45 minutes one way, you know, and that 45 minutes was the difference in between, you know, like an additional $5 to $7 on a paycheck, right? So I recently got a job at a video game store in a predominantly Mexican and black neighborhood. And yes, the meme and joke about motherfuckers not wanting to play a game unless it has a ball or a gun in it is 122% true. But it was the first time I ever saw the way I've always known because I grew up around it, but it's interesting to watch how media is consumed by minority and middle class and lower middle class people who are just getting by. But I also watched many a person sell their hobby, sell their console, sell their games just to make rent, just to get by, etc. But I don't know what they spent their other money on elsewise, so I can't really say or unsay. But I can say that I deeply do worry about all the minority children who don't have a video game console to get their frustration and anger out and then might end up in a system. Or, you know, all the people who don't have that form of entertainment or Pokemon as a way to potentially make money. Because truth be told, I love the saying, sell Pokemon cards, not drugs. But I also know that the best way to make money off Pokemon cards is to probably buy them and hold them and have them on ice and probably sit on them for 3, 4, 5, 6 years because unlike sneakers, they're not going to fucking crumble, and then sell them thereafter. I understand, yes, it's a speculative market, and yes, that is hyper commodity fetishization. But, you know, I get a little bit saddened and frustrated because I know the value of things are only going to go up as time goes on, but that's due to the explicit value of them being less on the market, more people opening those Charizard cards, and the people who never got the Charizard cards as a kid. And we're all just trying to heal our inner child a little bit. I don't know.
Pass those Reese's Puffs. So much flavor, competition can't touch. Yeah, pass those Reese's Puffs. Peanut butter, chocolate, and every crunch. Hey, pass those Reese's Puffs. Flavor so good it might make you bust. Yeah, pass those Reese's Puffs.
Hello, I need to close out this video. It is a long ass video, and I know I've talked about these things before and like how these things manifest and how these systems play into one another. But again, like being the person that I am and being the person that has gone through what I've gone through, you know, I know that all this shapes my worldview and how Pokemon isn't just Pokemon to me, but it's something that like it's always been something that's like kind of for rich kids. I put that in the video, but it's like Nintendo has always been seen as like a rich kid thing to me, where it's like growing up, the kids who had Nintendo consoles just didn't have one Nintendo console. They had like 4 or 5 of them, and they had a ton of Nintendo games, right? And I'm not saying that is or isn't a good or bad thing, but I also think about like, yeah, dude, like niggas don't play games that don't involve a ball or a gun, dude. What is that to say about the black youth, the minority youth in this country, right? What is that to say about like the economy and culture when, you know, people in their like 20s, you know, 50, 60 years ago were buying a house, you know, renting a house, maybe buying their second car, right? They were able to fetishize commodities that were actually designed for adults. Meanwhile, we're fucking chasing little cartoon dragons, right? And I understand that it's cool that you can now pass on your little cartoon dragon collection down generations and generations and it hold its wealth. But like also, not for nothing, at one point in time I tried to do a baseball card video, right? Because I had gotten literally a fucking box, like a fucking 30-pound box of sports cards from the bins at Goodwill, and I ended up fucking throwing them away because they were all worthless. They were all like just pennies, quarters, etc., right? And I understand that Pokemon has an innate cultural value, but I also look at like the cultural zeitgeist, and there's not an analog to it, which is good. There's not an analog to Pokemon, but it's also like, damn, did everything else just fumble culturally that badly? Or is like Japanese culture just kind of that hidden where it's like, it's nothing against Pokemon, you know, but it's like America doesn't have a Hello Kitty, culturally speaking. And that's so fascinating to me. But then going back to the thing about commodity fetishization, it's frustrating because it what's the word? It pops up in every aspect of my life, right? Like perfect example, guitars, right? You know, you look at like the guitar market, and that's something that can change people's life. I need to get my guitar repaired right now. That's a $200 to $300 repair. I could buy a new guitar at that point, right? But I'm also frustrated too, because like the price of guitars gets so much more expensive after a certain point, right? But like no guitar past $400 is actually gonna make you play better. Like there's no, as far as flat face value, there's no guitar that is worth more than $400. It's just speculative, right? And it's speculative because this generation and culture of boomers who's had this luxury, who's had this wealth, is able to hoard and kind of almost, instead of trickle down economics, it's trickle up economics. And what I mean by that is that like, okay, so let's say I own a guitar shop. I'm not selling guitars as well as I used to. Every guitar in that store is, you know, valued at $150. So I raise all of them by $50 additional dollars. So that means for every third guitar I sell, I essentially sell 4 guitars, right? I sell an additional 4th, and then I'm making more money, right? So I need to sell a little bit less, you know, but it's also too that like I feel like as somebody who's had a lot of commodities, who's had a lot of limited edition things, special edition things, you know, over the years, who's had to sell a lot of that, I feel like it squeezes wealth and shit away from me. Like I talked about this on TikTok, but everything's fucking colonization, and it pisses me off because like I feel like this economy of like tech bros and speculative whales and people who have this wealth, who can play with money and fuck around with money, are fucking up the entire economy for everybody. And now it's damn near impossible to get some fucking RAM because, you know, Microsoft is leaving the fucking console market because they're focusing on AI, right? And Microsoft leaving the console market then destroys the entire economy of gaming because that's one of the last three left. Now we're only left with two companies, right? You know, in my ideal world, fucking Sega would have entered the console market. Apple would have entered the console market. You know, we wouldn't have to worry about, I don't know, what was that? Was my lips just dry? I'm sorry. That looked nasty. I might censor that. But like you have these companies, everything is shrinking and consolidating, right? But nothing's expanding. And I feel like people are being allowed less and less, right? And Pokemon cards are worth more than ever. But like at the same time, I look at Pokemon cards and I look at the culture of that and I think about it's for the kids. It's for the kids. And like, I feel like so many people are into it because it can make them money, not because they actually rock with Pokemon, but they by proxy rock with Pokemon because of the money it can make them. It's like purely in it for the value of it, right? And that's what I find so deeply and immensely frustrating about Pokemon and Pokemon culture. I don't know. It is what it is. I absolutely love and adore Pokemon, but there is a dark side to Pokemon. And it's this kind of shadow that exists within all of culture and the entire cultural zeitgeist. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend some time with me. This is an hour-long plus video. I'm so greatly appreciative. Thank you for listening to this. If you want to help me out, please join my Patreon. I'm going to put the notes and like all the like, you know, footage and all of that on there for this video, but then I do notes for every one of my videos. This was kind of off rip, which is kind of why it's so like cattywampus all over the place. But I like it. I think it turned out very authentic and raw, right? And that's what I came to YouTube to offer, something that potentially not other people have experienced. So once again, thank you so much for taking time out of my day. I can't speak. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend some time with me. I'm always greatly appreciative. You don't have to go home, but you cannot stay here because sadly the video is over. Have a nice one. Bye.
悲しい朝汚れな